UX Podcast Episode 279.
Hello, I'm Per Axbom.
And I'm James Roy Lawson.
And this is UX Podcast. We're in Stockholm, Sweden, and you're listening in 200 countries and territories in the world, from Angola to the Netherlands.
From time to time, we bring you a repeat show. This is an episode from our extensive back catalogue, resurfacing some of the ideas and thoughts from the past that we believe are still relevant and well worth revisiting.
Steve, welcome to UX Podcast.
Thank you.
You've done so much, and what we want to talk to you about today is your most recent creation, Doorbells, Danger, and Dead Batteries, User Research War Stories. And I have to say, I finished this book actually today, and I usually don't have time to finish the books prior to these interviews because we don't get the books that much ahead of time.
Just to make you feel better, Per, I didn't finish it in time. I'm halfway through. I'm halfway through.
But I loved it. And it gave me so many different emotions reading it. And I actually, when I was thinking about it, I was starting to compare it to that documentary Humans. I don't know if you know about it, but since all these stories encompass the world, I mean, they're from Afghanistan, they're from Japan, they're from Uganda, whatever, and you get so many insights into these what these people have experienced. But now I'm getting ahead of myself as usual. So explain to us, because it's not like your regular kind of book. It's war story. So what is a war story then?
Yeah, a war story is a story about, in this case, these are stories about user research. So a user research war story is a story about a researcher trying to accomplish something, facing some challenge. And I think what makes these stories, in this specific type of stories, the storyteller doesn't always overcome their challenge. Sometimes, I think when we look at sort of stories as a pedagogical tool or whatever, however we find stories being used, they're often stories of overcoming and succeeding. And these are stories that are a little more gritty or a little more grounded where, sometimes you lose out, you don't win, or you don't end up where you think you were going to end up. And I think what makes these stories powerful is that difference. Like, what happens when things go wrong? And wrong, of course, is on a continuum. I think I say in the book, wrong or different from what was expected. So just what the book encompasses is many different categories or patterns or themes of ways in which things can go wrong. And so there's kind of a deep dive into each of these different areas where things don't go the way that we expected, and what do we get out of that?
I actually think when I was reading the book, it struck me about how the book could be quite a good, I suppose not therapy tool, or maybe a good therapy tool for overcoming imposter syndrome. Because when you're reading these stories, and we've discussed before, we've talked before about how reluctant our industry seems to be at times to share the bad days. We're first up on stage to talk about the good days, but the bad days get swept under the carpet, and I think that feeds the imposter syndrome that a lot of people suffer from. But by reading these stories, you kind of you realise that a lot of people out there, they have bad days too.
Yeah, I mentioned the therapeutic benefit as well, I think, in the introduction. So I'm with you. I think hearing a story of how somebody else has messed up, and it's not that we're saying like, oh, well, don't, just only do sort of a second-rate effort. In these stories, you see people that, to the best of their abilities at the time that the story is kind of happening for them, are absolutely doing their best, but they're human beings. They're flawed. They're imperfect. Their judgment is as best as it can be, but it's flawed. And so you see things go wrong. And I see people reading these stories or reading this book and having a couple reactions. And one is to feel very critical of these storytellers. And I found this a lot when I was kind of going through drafts of the book. People would say, well, well, this story is interesting, but I would never have done that, or doesn't this person realize? And that's okay. I mean, I kind of encourage people not to be judgmental, just because it's a different way to go through life, I guess, especially if we think about research. But if you do find yourself being judgmental, then reflecting on what's the difference between your view of the world and what this researcher did helps you see what some of the takeaways for you might be. I would never do that, but I would never do what so-and-so did. But in articulating that, I realize, oh, one of my best practices is X. But then on the flip side, I think this is kind of what you were getting at, seeing somebody else mess up and realizing that the world didn't end, that it's natural, it's going to occur, facilitates, I think, our own sense of empathy for all these different participants and for ourselves. Back to your point about imposter syndrome, maybe one of the ways to overcome imposter syndrome is to have empathy for ourselves. And if we realize, oh yeah, other people are going to mess up, they are, here's a whole book of them, and we know this is just the tip of the iceberg, then we can have empathy for them and empathy for ourselves, and feel okay with what we do know and what we don't know, as we're all on our paths to get better at everything. But obviously research here being the focus, and research is this very personal thing. So having empathy for ourselves as we make mistakes and learn from those mistakes and improve is so much better than saying, well, I suck and I'm no good at this. It's just not a great way to be. And I think the value for the practice and for the community is having people take care of themselves and do their best to get better, but be realistic about it.
Yeah. So it's really a book not about how to do user research. It's not even a book about how not to do user research. It's about helping people feel more comfortable with the concept of being unprepared or anything can happen. And when you said just now is when you end every chapter with you've divided these into different chapters with different learnings that you end each chapter with. And one of the learnings, it was what you said just now, learn from mistakes. But you're saying that it's not learn from mistakes so that you can stop making that mistake. It's so don't stop making mistakes, but learn how to handle them and how your research even could benefit from them. Because some of the ideas I take from it, like the sore thumb or the burned thumb story, where a woman burned her thumb before going into the session, and it made her be more vulnerable, which everybody had something to talk about, and it probably made that session even better. So sure, learn from your mistakes, but maybe not in the sense that you should not make them again, is what I'm thinking.
Right, and so it's not a how-to book the way that my previous book, Interviewing Users, is maybe more kind of a text. It might be what you'd look at if you were just learning the craft. And here, it's not a how-to, and yet there's lots to be learned, I think, from reading the book, but it's more in the flavor of what you kind of talked about. Yeah, so Jen Downs burns her thumb and, sort of laughs about her own clumsiness, and then tries to deal with it this way and tries to deal with it that way and then tries to deal with it this way, and then ends up in the interview, and then the receptionist gives her a glass of ice water, and she's sitting there looking like a dork with her thumb in a glass of ice water, and then she spills the ice water all over the beautiful conference room table. Like, it's not even just the burned thumb, it's then all these things kind of go wrong, and you can read the story and you can see a little bit about how Jen is in the world and how she's sort of comfortable with her own, sequence of screwing up, and how she's a little lighthearted about it. At least in retrospect, she is. And then, and as you say, it changed the dynamics of the room. I think in this context, she comes from this slightly more hip company, and she's at this very conservative workplace. And the burned thumb creates something to talk about. It creates a way to make her vulnerable and less and more accessible to people. So she has she finds a way to deal with it, and then she articulates all these different lessons, like how vulnerability is a way to connect with people, and build rapport. And so that's not sort of a how-to thing, but it does surface these interesting principles that we can think about for ourselves as we go out in the world and interact with people in a research context or in others, how do we want to conduct ourselves? And Jen's example is really, I don't know, it's very inspiring. She kind of makes it funny and very sort of earnest and personal, as opposed to, you could imagine telling that story with a lot of curse words, right? Like, oh, then I burned my thumb and then this happened and I was so mad and I had to do the interview and I didn't want to do it because my thumb hurt and I couldn't focus on what the person was saying. She turns it all around and kind of is just very kind of connected and present with what she's trying to do. And so it's a really, her story is a really lovely one because of that, the personal truth. I mean, not to be so hand wavy woo woo, but she does kind of this personal truth, finds one for herself in this experience, which is, it's an everyday banal thing. I burned my thumb, blah, 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 blah. But she finds her way to talk about it in a way that's, I don't know, pretty inspiring. It's funny and inspiring and, just makes me think about myself and how I move through the world and so on.
Yeah, I think just that one of the things for me when I'm reading it is that sometimes what was interesting for me was not what was said in the story as such, but what wasn't said. I'm at times I was finding myself on that boundary of being judgmental, but even that was the kind of the interesting aspect of some of the stories was your reaction to it. Like with the an example there would be the story, I think it was Melissa and Mike, who there was the crazy guy that came into the interview, just barged into the room unannounced, and demanded that Melissa leave the interview now and goes to this telephone conference that they'd arranged in the next room, and there I started reflecting about kind of the culture of that organisation that they were doing the interview at, and how that must be to allow those kind of situations to exist. So you see, your mind starts tumbling into some judgmental things, but also some reflective things about how you would be in that situation, as we mentioned earlier.
That's the great thing about stories, isn't it? As sort of a mode of reflection is, you're really connected with these other people that are having this experience. But I do that as well. I think about, I project myself into the story and think about what I would do or how I would feel. And I think that's what makes it it's entertaining to read stories, because we participate them in a certain way. And as you say, we reflect on them in this other way. I think that's, I don't know, that was one of the things I wanted to try to do here was convey some of the things we think about in talking about research, but in this really different way. I think it's a different experience to read this. Now I feel like I'm just pitching the book to you guys, and you
Oh, but
kind of.
I'm agreeing.
We would absolutely be agreeing. I think I've heard you say elsewhere about the power of. There's a power in them just being stories, and we're in a world full of clickbait articles with the seven things you need to do when you do this, or kind of 3 mistakes you have to avoid when doing that, and everything is bullet lists and everything's prescriptions. So it's nice to just share things that have happened. Shit happens, and we share it and we talk about it, and we can learn things from it.
But also, I think coming into the industry and coming into becoming a user researcher, reading this book can prepare you in ways that other books cannot prepare you in. I'm now thinking of the emotional roller coaster I went through when I just reading the chapter, I don't know what you called it, but where they enter people's homes and there's this pungent smell and everything's dirty, and you sort of want to get out of there. And the reasoning you do with yourself to stay put and actually stay with your intent to learn something from this person, and realize that you are learning something from this person, and perhaps that was the best person from all the interviews, and just getting over those obstacles of judging. There was this woman who lived with her cats, and the dog was vomiting, and then they realized that she had been a peace negotiator, I think it was, and you realize, oh man, this woman has a backstory, and as soon as I read that, and I realized, oh my God, I have so much judgment, and all people have a backstory that you need to learn about to actually build up that empathy. And there was so much in there that made me think about how would I react in that situation. But just reading it, I realized I probably could handle that situation better now that I have read about it, that I have read about someone else's experience.
You know what? I'm so proud of all these people that contributed. There's more than 60 contributors here. And you know what I really am proud of is that these are not anecdotes, they're stories. The anecdote is we went into this woman's house and it just smelled disgusting and the dog was vomiting and like, oh, she was some kind of peace negotiator. Like that anecdote just kind of makes you go, whoa. But it doesn't really, it doesn't induce the reaction that you had, that kind of reflection. And so all these folks that have contributed have, I think, dug deep personally to bring out the details and make it come alive and take you on their journey of what happened and how they were feeling. And I think the craft of telling stories as well as they need to be told to do what these stories are doing is something that people can work on. And ideally we can move past sort of anecdotes where we go, that's cool, and have people do more storytelling, beginning, middle, end, surfacing all that detail. And I think that detail it's hard if you're not sort of a natural storyteller. It takes a little bit of work to do, but I think that's what gets us to have these kinds of reactions like you're describing, where you start to reflect as a reader. I think there's, it's like it's the iceberg model, like the shallow story is now I'm mixing metaphors. The shallow story has sort of a certain amount of value, but the deeper story does bring us to reflect on these deeper truths, and it takes more work to produce those stories. But I think that's where we can just get so much more out of them.
And the well-written story can actually help you feel those emotions, so it triggers those emotions in your brain, so it's actually like you have experienced it. So I've been in story reading mode. This is my 4th book I read this year, and the previous 3 were nonfiction. And I realized that I'm really triggered by that's probably why I loved it so much. I'm really triggered by these stories because I realized by reading them, I'm living them. Which means that I've already experienced them, which helps me in my job. So it's a better way of learning, as I see it right now, than reading do this and do that in a bullet point format.
I think as well, when you bring together a body of stories across the blog and in the book as well, that are from so many different parts of the world, cultures, even points in time, it surfaces the complexity of our cultures and also how our biases play on them and our presumptions that we go in to these situations with. A lot of these stories highlight that kind of clashing of worlds, which is really good to get across in story format.
Totally agree.
So I want to spend some time on my pet subject these days, because you have a chapter on that, is ethics and trust. So it's something that I haven't come across myself in my user research, but these stories were so good then in describing this is what could happen. What would you do? I would even want to read like a book where you actually choose what would you do to go to page 10 if you do this, and page 12 you do that. Choose your own adventure that I read a lot when I was a kid. But so if a participant that you're interviewing is engaging in unlawful activity, what do you do? And you wrote something about ethics being a conversation rather than a set of principles, and I like that. How you wrote that. Could you just describe how you think about how user researchers should approach this idea of ethics?
I mean, I think what you said, your sort of headline for this part of the discussion was if you see somebody engaging, one of your participants engaging in unethical behavior or unlawful behavior, what do you do? Yeah. And, not to be sort of smug, but I feel like the response to that is yes. Right, the question is the thing. Yes, what do you do? And so that's the conversation, right? What do you do? So you've asked it as a question, and the question sort of wants to be answered. But I feel like by asking the question, you then have to go down a path yourself and with somebody else to try to figure that out. And because there doesn't seem to be. There are certain areas I think where you can throw in some ethical rules, and I mentioned I think in the footnotes. I can't remember where it is, but I mentioned IDEO has a I'm going to botch the title. My apologies, but it's like the tiny book of design research ethics or something. It has a sort of an appealing title, which is a free PDF from IDEO's website somewhere, and it's
the little book of design research ethics.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. I knew whatever I said, I knew it was going to be wrong. Sorry.
I use the internet. I didn't know. I just pressed buttons.
No, I'm not apologizing to you. I'm apologizing to the IDEO people who created this little book. And they're an organization. They can create policies, and so they have policies around data retention and so on. Like those are sort of things you can have some governance around. That your clients don't get access to the contact info of the participants, but it's still kind of a baseline, right? I don't think IDEO says, well, like if you see someone stealing a banana while you're doing a shop along, what do you do, right? I think with all these stories, and certainly with the ethical ones for sure, with the chapter around ethics, you can't create kind of a set of rules that would be sufficient to, well, I guess I shouldn't say you couldn't, because some theoretician will tell me I'm wrong. You could. It's not reasonable to create a set of rules that would allow for all these things. And so the kinds of stories that come up, in the history of social science literature, you have people witnessing a murder, sort of more explicit kind of 10 Commandments types of crimes, and that still there are sort of struggling. The social scientists and that have a history of dealing with this and writing about it, and reflecting about it, face these ethical conflicts. If your research brings you into contact with something that could harm the person that you're studying, what is your obligation? If that person commits a crime, what's your obligation to protect that person? I think the trend is to lean towards protecting that person, but then that might expose risk to ourselves, to our employers, to our clients. It's not black and white, and you don't even have to be fantastical to come up with a scenario that, if you say, well, it's always going to be this, we can easily come up with a variation of that scenario that puts it into a different category. And so that's the conversation, I think. Like, you don't know. I don't think you can go out into the world with this sense of, ethical certitude that I always do this or I always do that. It's really, really messy. And I think what you see in some of these stories is people grappling with that set of ethics and what their values are, who they're trying to protect, who they might expose. They're stuck between delivering good research that can help their client take action and protecting the person who gave them the insights that helped them understand how to help their client. You see people struggling to make sense when they have these different forces pulling them in different directions and different obligations and different commitments. And that is the conversation. That is the thing they're trying to navigate. And there may be no satisfactory answer if you're going to let someone down or not sort of satisfy everybody or not be able to live up to your principles in every direction. And so I guess that's the conversation. That's the journey.
Yeah, and as you're saying, it's a conversation as well. And you said in the beginning, it's something you need to have a conversation about with yourself, but with someone else as well. It's very hard to come up with the answer for yourself. To have people around you that you feel that you can trust and talk to.
I was definitely inspired. I think I copied some of this from the IDEO book. They talk about who they list out who in their organization you as an IDEO staffer can go to. And so that's, this person in this role, this, it's your boss, it's the head of your team.
I think that means it's time for Heptascale questions.
Good.
Yeah. So Heptascale questions are when we ask you one question each, and we ask you to rate something on a scale of 1 to 7.
You answer the question with 1 to 7.
A number.
A number from 1 to 7.
And the scale will become apparent by the way the question is asked. But you are not allowed to expand on your answer at this point in time. Do you want to start, James?
How much is user research a continual fight against your biases? your biases.
And how does the scale work? 7 is a lot.
Yeah.
6.
And my question is, on a scale of 1 to 7, how important is it for user researchers to regularly practice being non-judgmental?
3.
You know, one of the downsides we have with the Heptacles Challenge is that the questions, when they're, well, at times, kind of make you want to go, oh my God, that's an entire podcast episode in itself, working out why you give that number.
That will be part 2.
But you can, Steve, we'll let you give 1 minute. You can choose one of the 2 questions. Just give 1 minute explanation of why you chose the number you did.
The first question, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I've said it a few times. I think unpacking one's own biases, or sort of just assembling them, it's actually my favorite thing about doing research. And I have this happen to me all the time, where I'm kind of being efficient. You know, I've got somebody figured out pretty quickly based on some cues, and I'm very proud of myself for, the environment, what we learned from recruiting them, how old they are, some demographic things, their race, their gender, whatever. I've got kind of a story for them, and then I'm going to kind of platform my inquiry on top of what I've already learned. So I'm being very efficient, and I feel really good about that. And then the more the conversation goes on, the more I realize, their view of the world is not what I thought it was, and there's so much more to be learned here once I let go of what I've already decided. And that's like a joyful discovery. I'm not sad that I'm wrong. I'm really happy. And so I think it's okay to bring that judgment in, as long as you know how to hear the signals that say, oh, you're wrong and there's more here, and hooray for us because we get to do this new thing and discover and kind of connect in a fresh way.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the reasons why I put that question in and I put the emphasis on your biases is that it feels like we get taught or get told a lot about how to look after the biases when we're interviewing, or the biases of the subject matter in the participant in the interview, but whereas to reflect on how much your own biases really do drive all this is sometimes I think it's underplayed.
Thank you so much for being on the show, Steve. It was great having you again. I'm looking forward to hearing James when he's finished your book, and we'll talk about more about it.
I will finish it, I promise.
It's always great to talk to you guys. I really enjoy it. Thank you for including me.
One thing I've been realizing when I was reading the book, as well as what I've said in the interview about it, sometimes what was said in the story itself, but what wasn't said, and that kind of comes into reminiscing as well. I've read half the book, so it's 30 stories or something, and I've already probably generated about 12 stories of my own because of the reminiscing that you just naturally do. I mean, for me and you, we've been around for quite a while. We're not new to the profession. So we do have our own war stories. So by reading through it, you reminisce. It bubbles up another story while you're reading someone else's story, and I've enjoyed that so far.
You really start thinking about, I've been through something similar. But just getting lost at a client's office is, I think many of us have been through that as well.
That was a story when a guy he'd gone to the toilet, I think it was, and he'd not taken he was in a network operations center, and he'd not taken his temporary pass or his guide,
exactly,
or his phone, or even his telephone with him, and got kind of trapped in a different. He
needed key card for 3 doors that he had passed, but so he was locked in, and he didn't remember the name of the person he was going to meet.
So what's your story?
I've just been lost in corridors in places when I've been asked to leave can you find your way out? And I'm like, yeah, sure I can. And then I walk around for like 5 minutes trying to find the exit. That has happened to me like 10 times.
Do when you said that now, I remember a time when I've done that too, and you end up meeting the people you've had the meeting with because you've taken so long to get out. They kind of, are you still here? Oh, but one of the there was a story in the book about is when I think when they brought a product manager called Bob to a coffee with customers session, And this reminded me of a time when I was sat observing together with a programmer. Following the principle that we preach a lot of the time with kind of exposure hours, that you get as many people as you can to kind of see real people using the things you make, because it gives so much empathy and so much more understanding. So I was doing this with a programmer. So it was me and the programmer observing someone do their work, and it was a real problem because every single time this person we were observing started to struggle. The programmer who'd made the software they were struggling with jumped in and fixed the problem. They can say, "Oh, no, you do this. You click there. You do that."
Oh, so in actually helping the person do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So every single time we got to that point where there's something really interesting coming down. Look, they're gonna show us kind of like how that is actually quite difficult to work with, or they're going to show us now's a chance for me to kind of ask them why. Ask them kind of like, why do you want to do that? Get some kind of like background information. And they just kept diving in and kind of fixing.
So what did you do?
I had to step in.
Yeah.
I actually had to say, I mean, look, you have to just leave it be now, and you end up in that really awkward situation where you don't want to kill the enthusiasm of the programmer, who's so enlightened now. They're suddenly kind of, they're passionately kind of wanting to fix things now when they see someone real using the software. You don't want to kill that off, but at the same time, you don't want to destroy the user research and the moment of being able to find out what's driving someone.
Yeah.
So that just one of the examples of the stories that the reminiscing of the stories that you think of yourself when you're going through the book. It's
that's a great story.
That's a journey in itself.
I just love the human aspect of the whole book, that everybody's just human with their emotions and fallacies, and you can't really predict anything that's going to happen because we don't know what people do, because they are unpredictable, because they're controlled by emotions, and that's the fun of it as well. So I think he says in the book as well, we're all just participants. It's not that somebody's controlling it, we're all just participants in this game.
Yeah, we are. It's just a big game. Well, you can find show notes for today's show at uxpodcast.com. You can follow us anywhere as UX Podcast, and I mean absolutely anywhere. I mean, if you can't find us, then just tell us where we aren't, and we'll probably be there in a few days. If you aren't already a subscriber, then remember to add our show to your podcast client.
Remember to keep moving.
Did you almost forget you had to say that at the end?
No, that was a dramatic pause.
That was a dramatic pause.
It was a dramatic pause. It was well, apparently it worked, because even you you wondered.
No, but I picked up on it. It wasn't dramatic. It's like in the Big Bang Theory, when they have those pause bits, and the pause is slightly too long before you get the kind of swirly atom thing, and it's long enough that you think, "Good God, has the streaming crashed?" I'll see you on the other side. Pau, why is the elevator always sick?
I don't know, James. Why is the elevator always sick?
It keeps coming down with something.